Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the floor framing webinar. My name is Nick, and I'll be doing the presentation with you today. Just like all of our previous webinars, everybody will be on mute. So if you do happen to have any questions at any point during the presentation, please feel free to go ahead and enter that into the questions area. And at the end of the class, I'll go through and answer any questions that may have come up. Also, at the end of the class, I will be sending out an email that will contain a PDF that's going to cover everything that we're going to be talking about today. So again, today's class is on floor framing, and my name is Nick. I'm just going to go over a quick lesson overview of what we're going to cover in today's class. So today we're going to be going through and we're going to review how to add in structural floors within Envisioneer. We're going to learn how to customize the framing in detail so that it meets your specific construction needs. So first, let's take a look at structural floor framing. So floors have framing members and settings assigned to them in their properties. By default, a floor is created automatically when you draw your exterior wall layout, provided that the layout is a closed circuit of walls. As you create rooms, the automatic floor is then divided so that each room has its own floor, and consequently, in some cases, it will also have its own floor frame. Now, most builders don't want to frame their floors like this. You want to actually create a floor frame from perimeter wall to perimeter wall. So in Envisioneer, you can do this using the structural floor tool, and it has various insertion options that will allow you to insert by perimeter, by room, or by picking points. So first, we're going to look at creating a custom floor frame in Envisioneer. So when you insert a floor using the structural floor by picking points tool, you can define the size and the shape of the floor as well as where the span starts and ends. So first we need to add in some walls. So I'm going to drop in some walls in Envisioneer. I'm just going to use a 2x6 cement board siding wall, and I'm just going to make this 25 feet, and we'll go down 30 feet. We'll come across 20 feet, and we'll go up 5, and then over 5, just so we have a bit of a jog in our design. And we can, again, using Envisioneer, we can adjust the sizes of these. So I'm just going to make this a little bit bigger. I'm just going to make that 30 feet. So what we're now going to look at is, and I just want to take a second here to show the different types of floors. So by default, I have under settings, document settings, and under building aids, I have the automatically insert floors option checked. So this will always insert a floor surface for me in my design. Now in saying that, when I take a look at that floor surface, the easiest way to see it is to either go into a 3D view and you can see inside your design using your camera, and you can walk inside and see the floor. Or you could just simply click on the designer's view or designer's plan view, and this will show you the floor as well, as long as you don't have a ceiling added in or a roof. So here I can see the floor that is added in, and it is a hardwood floor. But when I select it, you're going to notice that it just highlights in green. I'm not seeing any of the characteristic grips that we normally see in Envisioneer. We're just seeing the outline of the floor. The other thing you're going to notice is when you right-click to bring up the context menu, it is very limited in the controls that you can actually use. So in here we can see we can select or deselect, we can open up its properties, we can delete it, we can elevate it, but there really isn't a lot of control for this specific floor. So while having the automatic floor option turned on is great for instantly inserting a floor, being able to edit this floor becomes a little bit more difficult. So if this is going to be something that you don't want to use, you can again turn that off under settings and document settings, and then you can manually add in your own floor surfaces. And we'll look at that a little bit later. But for now, I'm going to take this floor and I'm going to elevate it up. I want this floor to sit 1/4 of an inch higher than my subfloor. So when I add in my structural floor, that's going to be the new floor height, and then this finished floor will sit on top of that subfloor. So I need to elevate that up. So we're going to make that 1/4 of an inch. I'm going to say apply, and then OK. I'm just going to go back into 2D plan view. And now we're going to insert our structural floor. And we can insert a structural floor in a couple of different ways. We're going to be looking at the structural floor, and we're going to add it in by picking points. So I'm going to go up, and under Insert, we have structural floors. And again, you can do by perimeter, by room, or by picking points. If you do by perimeter, it will find the perimeter of the building and it will add in that structural floor for you. By room, we'll add in the structural floor within the room shape itself. So if you have interior walls in here, it will insert a structural floor within the rooms. And we're going to use the structural floor by picking points tool, which will allow us to define the points that we want for that particular structural floor. If you don't like to use the menus and you like to use the tabs like I do, you can select under Building, Structural Floor, and then just select the structural floor by picking points. I'm then just going to snap to the center of the walls. And when I snap to the center of the walls, it will now start to define the shape of that structural floor. I snap to the center because now it will actually push this out to the exterior perimeter of that wall for me. So you're always going to snap to the center when adding in your structural floors. Once you're finished, you can then right click and select Finish. If at any point you made a mistake while adding in any of those points, you can simply right click to bring up the context menu like we see here, and you can select the Step Back option. The Step Back option will allow you to step back to the very first point that you added in. We can then say Finish, and that will now add in our structural floor. Now, the structural floor that we added in is defined from our catalog over here on the right-hand side. So I have the 2x10 floor selected. We have a 2x12 and 11 and 7/8, and you can add in and create your own. You're also going to see that the structural floor is broken into with a sill plate and with no sill plate. So depending on the type of construction you're working on, if you're building on top of a foundation wall, so this is your ground floor and it's sitting on a foundation, then you're going to want to have a sill plate. If you're working on a design that is the second floor as an example, where you don't need or don't require a sill plate, then you would select the no sill plate option to create the second floor creation. I'm just going to double click on the floor in the catalog so we can see this. And what a structural floor comprises of is a group of elements together to create a floor container. So the first thing we're going to see is the general properties. And under the general properties, we can see the joist direction, the joist spacing. We also have a joist at bearing. So the joist at bearing is what do you want to happen to your joist when you insert a bearing line. And a bearing line is going to be a line that you add in to define where you want this floor to be supported. So if I add in a beam underneath my floor, that's going to be my bearing line. What do I want to happen to my joists at that point? Do I want them to stagger? And then how much do I want that stagger to be? So this will create that overlapping look over top of your beam. We also give you the option to use a holdback. And what a holdback will do is it will give you the ability to create a recessed beam into the floor cavity. So now the beam can be elevated into the floor cavity and the joist will now run to the face of the beam. The distance that you see there is going to be whatever the half the thickness of the beam is. So if your beam is 10 inches thick, then you're going to want that to be 5 inches. If your beam is 8 inches thick, then you're going to want that distance to be 4 inches. This way, each side of the joist is held back that distance, and it will now fit flush up against the beam itself. I'm going to change this back to stagger. And then you also have the ability to adjust the sheathing. So what type of sheathing do you want to show? What type of joist? So you have a joist. You can again assign an actual member. You can assign a sill plate, a band joist, a rim joist, and an opening header as well. I'm going to cancel out of there. And now that we have our structural floor added in, we can take a look at what it's looking like in our 3D view. So we can see that our finished floor is now sitting up top. If I kind of pan down a little bit, we should now see our subfloor is now underneath that. And now we see our actual joists. And we can see those joists there. If I go back into 2D, we can do a couple of different things here. So this floor will also move with our walls. So if I move my wall and I make this a little bit bigger, the floor will also move with the walls themselves. So if I want to make this a little bit wider, let's say 35 feet, it will move and the floor will also accommodate that adjustment. If I want to change the direction of my joist, I need to change the joist direction. Now, to select a structural floor, you need to take into consideration that you're working with a 3D model. So when I try to select something, it's going to select the highest point of that model. So right now it's seeing the top of the wall whenever I select in here. So if I left click, it's going to see the top of the wall. So what I like to do is I like to zoom in. I like to keep the middle point of the wall visible, and I like to select right in a corner on the exterior side of the core. And I left click once. By doing that, I'm selecting a point where I know that structural floor is going to be. Now, all I have to do is hold down my shift key, and with my flywheel on my mouse, I can push forward, and it will now move through the selection process. And the next thing it's going to select is the structural floor. The reason why I suggest going to a corner is because the structural floor layout line is a dashed dot line. So if I was to select right here, it would see through that line. So by going to a corner, I know the lines are going to meet at that corner. I'm going to be able to select the structural floor itself. You'll know you have the structural floor selected because you'll see this red triangle. That lets you know that the structural floor is what is actually selected. We can also double check that by going down here in the bottom left-hand corner, and you'll see one object selected, which is the primary object. And it is a 2x10 floor system with a 3/4 inch subfloor, and that is actually showing you the structural floor system. So now that I know that I have the structural floor selected, I can right click and I can go into the properties of that floor. You're going to notice that the dialog has changed a little bit. So I don't see all of the other elements anymore. I'm only seeing just the general properties and the joist material. And that's because I'm only going to be able to control the joists right now. And I can say I want to change the joist direction to be 0. So 0 will move the joists left and right. 90 will move them up and down. I still want to keep the joist spacing the same, and I still want this to be staggered at that 1 foot. I can now simply select OK. The other elements that are no longer visible in here are still a part of the drawing, but you can actually select them and edit them in the drawing after they've been inserted. So I'm just going to say OK. And it's going to ask me, do I want to regenerate all the edges? Yes, I do. And it now creates a different layout for my joists. So now I want to create a bearing line. I want to break my joists from here to here because I'm going to have a beam spanning in this direction. So I can now simply right click, and I'm not going to go to properties. I'm going to select structural floor. I'm then going to select the option of insert bearing line. You're going to notice that there are other options in here. So you can move the framing base point. You can also remove a bearing line, or you can stretch a bearing line. Again, we are just going to go in and we're just going to insert our bearing line. And we're going to start from here. We're going to move our mouse up, and I like to use my snap points to snap it into the actual walls, and it will then go through and break all of those joists for me and then stagger them. Now what I can do is in my floor plan, I can also add in a beam if I want to show that there is a beam underneath this floor. So I can select my members option. I can select a beam like a W type beam, and I can now simply place that beam into the design like so. And then in a 3D view, I can elevate that beam up or down so that it sits underneath my actual joist. So I can just go in here and say elevate and just say -10 inches for now, and it will lower that beam down to sit below my joist. And I like to look at this in a rendered outline view. It just helps to see that a little bit clearer. And we can now see the beam sitting underneath our actual joist. So next, we're going to be looking at floor framing. So you can also add in a framed floor in Envisioneer. So the floor tool can also be used by selecting the floor by room, floor by perimeter, or floor by picking points option. And this will add in a finished floor that can also contain framing. So I'm just going to select these walls here. I'm just going to go duplicate, or sorry, select all similar and then duplicate. And then we're just going to duplicate these walls off to the side here. If I go into a 2D designer's view, we're going to see the finished floor is also in here. I'm just going to delete that out. So I'm just going to click delete. I'm going to go back into 2D. And now I'm going to go up and I'm going to select my floors option. So again, under building, if you like to use the buttons, under building, you're going to see your floors, and you can do floor by room, floor by perimeter, floor by picking points. I'm just going to do floor by perimeter. And we can also do the same by going to insert and floors and then selecting the option here. So again, we're doing floor by perimeter. I'm just going to grab the hardwood floor and I'm just going to drop in the hardwood floor into my design. When I go back into the 2D designer's plan view, I can still see that floor in there. And what I'm actually seeing is the hardwood floor all the way through the design. I'm going to go into the properties of that floor for a second here. Now, in the properties of the floor, there are a couple of things we need to take a look at. So by default, in our catalog, we have our floor set to just be an actual surface. So there is nothing actually framing wise assigned to this floor. So it is set to general. But if I do want to show a framed floor in here, then I need to select the framed option. Once I have the framed option selected, I need to select the specify framing button. Once I have that button selected, it's now going to allow me to control what I want to see as a framed floor in this design. So I can see that I have a joist, a rim joist, and an opening header. But right now they're all set to no. So I want to make sure that they're set to yes. I want to actually see the framing in this design for all three of these. I can also control independently what I want each of those members to be. Do I want that to be a 2x10 for my joist, for my rim joist and my opening headers? I would make that adjustment here. I can again adjust the spacing and again the direction. So again, I'm going to make that 0 and it will adjust the span or the spacing and the direction of the span of that joist as well. I'm just going to say OK, and then I'm going to select OK. And now what it's done is, we're not going to see it right away, but if we pull our camera back here and we move over to our other design, we're going to see our finished floor, and that's all we're going to see right now. The reason for that is the framing is a part of the framing tool. So if I want to show framing by selecting the display framing option, which we can see down here in that lower toolbar, I can select display framing, or I can go up to view and select display framing. And now I'll see the joists in my design. This will only show the joist. You're not going to see a subfloor, so it's going to be a little bit different than our structural floor, where it's not going to create that sheathing material on top, but we'll see our joist. You're also not going to be able to create a bearing line like you do with the structural floor. So the structural floor tool is the more robust tool, and it's going to be available in Building Essentials and Construction Suite. So if you are looking to create floor containers in your design, you will probably want to take advantage of the structural floor tool. You're going to need to have at least Building Essentials or Construction Suite to do that. I'm just going to go back into and turn this off, and I want to go back into display all but framing. If I want to show the framing of the floor in the design as well, I can still do that. So I can go into my view filter and I can go in and say, well, under floors, I want to show the actual framing. So I'm just going to unlock this and I'm going to open up the eye for framing. And I'll now see the framing for that floor as well. Now, when you do that, the floor surface itself sits on top of our actual joist, but it doesn't really have a thickness to it. So the joists are going to ride right up to the very top of that surface. So to fix this or to make an adjustment to this, I need to separate the floor surface from the joist. To do that, I can go up and I can select under my members option, there is a convert framing to members. So I can now just simply select the floor and it will now take the framing out from within the floor surface itself, and now all of the framing is independent from the surface. So I can take the surface now and elevate it up a 1/4 inch to bring that up higher. And then all the framing members underneath that are now independent. So I can select them and edit them individually. And this is how I can create a floor plan for my joists that I would then be able to duplicate and adjust. So as an example, I can select all of these members. I can say lengthen to fence, and I can then say I want all of those members to lengthen to that area. I can then select these, duplicate them, and then I can duplicate these off to the side here as an example, and then we're just going to move them up so that they sit a bit higher. I don't want them to match up with that particular member, so I just want to make sure they don't line up, because if I do, then they will rejoin. And then I can move that up, and from here what I can do is I can move these over a foot or 6 inches or however far I want these to stagger, and I can just go move, and we'll say oh, missed my mistake there, edit, undo, reselect those ones, and then we'll just go in and say move, and we'll say 6 inches, and actually we'll go move again, we'll do that 1 foot, so we'll do another 6 inches, and I can now go in and say once again lengthen to fence, and I want those to end right here. So I'm going to start from this point up to there, and it will break all of those joists for me at that point. And then here what I can do is I can drop in a line, and I'm just going to say 1 foot. I'm going to drop a line in there. I can again select all of these, and I can say lengthen to fence and go from one point to the next, and it will now stagger those joists for me. So you have a couple of different ways to do this. If you're looking to use just the floor option and then breaking it into its individual members, you can do that. But again, the structural floor tool is the tool that will do all of this for you very easily. The last thing I wanted to show was a floor finish. So if I was to go back into our 3D CAM review as an example, and let's just move back over to this design here. I'm going to get rid of this hardwood floor that's in here, and we're going to add in our own floor in this area. So let's say we want this to be carpet over here. So I'm going to go back into designer's plan view, and I'm going to move my mouse so I'm just looking into this area. I can again use my floor option. I'm just going to do floor by room because I want it to go from the interior walls of this room. And I'm going to select the carpet option. And I'm just going to select the nylon loop carpet. And I'm going to bring my mouse into the drawing area. It's a little bit easier to see if you have this in the plan view. You can see what is going to contain that floor. So here we can see that blue outline is just highlighting exactly where that floor is going to go. But before I left click to insert it, I want to make sure I elevate it. Again, this needs to sit up above my structural floor. So I want to elevate this up to a certain height. I'm just going to make this a 1/4 inch again. So I'm just going to type in a 1/4 inch in the base height in the lower left-hand corner. And then I'm going to make sure I press tab to lock it in. So 1/4 inch, tab, and then left click once to place it in. I can then right click and select finish. And in that 2D plan view now, or designer's plan view, I can see that carpet. If I go into a 3D view, I can see that the carpet is now sitting on top of my subfloor, but it also terminates at the edge of the wall where my sheathing would go all the way to the exterior edge. So that's how you can add in your floor surfaces. So that covers everything that I wanted to talk about today. So I'm just going to go over a quick review. If you do happen to have any questions, please feel free to go ahead and enter those in. So in today's class, we went through and looked at the various options for inserting structural floors and inserting floor framing in Envisioneer. Some points to remember. The structural floor tool will insert all of the components of the floor based on the properties of the structural floor that is selected. The structural floor can be modified to add in bearing lines, and you can also adjust the framing base point. The floor tool can also be used to add in framing by specifying the floor as a frame floor and then assigning the correct members to the floor components. The floor tool adds in a floor finish like tile, carpet, or hardwood, and then it can be elevated to the right height so that the material would sit on top of the floor assembly that you've added in. So that appears to be everything that I needed to show you for today. So I do want to thank you all for attending. I do look forward to speaking with you all again very soon. Thank you very much, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day.